Good morning. My name is Nick Brown, the United States Attorney for the Western District of Washington. I am pleased to be joined by my federal, state, and local partners today to mark a great deal of hard work by law enforcement agencies that you see represented here today and many that you do not. Last week, the United States Attorney's Office indicted 27 defendants who are each alleged to have participated in a drug distribution scheme involving principally fentanyl and methamphetamine, and many of the defendants are alleged to have been connected with the Aryan Family Prison Gang. The indictments came at the end of a years-long investigation conducted via federal wiretap, led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and my office, and represents a really significant victory in our ongoing effort to keep our communities safe. After the indictments were returned last week by the grand jury, some 350 law enforcement officers were involved in early morning arrests and seizures here in Washington State and Arizona. During the execution of the search warrants and during the course of the wiretap investigation, officers seized an incredible amount of illegal drugs, approximately 1.9 million doses of fentanyl and more than 230 pounds of methamphetamine. And perhaps even more importantly, during the execution of the warrants last week, officers seized 177 firearms from some of the defendants' homes. This is in addition to the over 40 firearms that were seized during the course of the investigation. And you can see some of the photographs of those weapons here today. As the case filings show, most of the defendants were prohibited from possessing firearms to begin with because they had served time in prison and had felony convictions, crimes ranging from assault to robbery to drug trafficking. And it was during those prison sentences that many of these defendants became connected with each other through their involvement in the Aryan Family Prison Gang and other gangs, all under the umbrella of white power and white supremacy. This was a group of big distributors, and they have been involved in some incredibly dangerous behavior. They have pill presses, making their own potentially deadly fentanyl pills. They continue their involvement in this operation, even though at various times during the course of the wiretap, law enforcement officers used court-authorized warrants to secretly seize their stashes. The wiretap revealed that these gangsters believed that they were robbed by other people and did not know they were being surveilled by law enforcement. They even had the audacity to report some of these seizures as thefts to law enforcement. The principal danger that we face in this area when it comes to drug trafficking comes from cartels. But it takes organizations like the ones that we have indicted here to spread drugs in our communities where they do so much damage. And this includes my hometown of Steilacoom, Washington, where the lead defendant lived. I want to thank all of the agencies who are involved in this case: the FBI, the DEA, Homeland Security, the Department of Corrections. This case would also not have been possible with significant help from our local partners, from the Tacoma Police Department, Pierce County Sheriff's Office, and the Thurston County Narcotics Task Force, led by the Thurston County Sheriff's Office. We also received tremendous help from the Washington State Patrol, Customs and Border Protection, the Lewis County Sheriff's Office, the Lakewood Police Department, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and the Puyallup Police Department. But this effort was led by our partners in the FBI, and I'd like to ask Special Agent Rick Bellotti to tell you more about our work on this case. Rick.
Good morning. My name is Rick Bellotti, Special Agent in charge of FBI Seattle. Thank you for joining us today. I'm honored to be here with the U.S. Attorney's Office, as well as many of our investigative partners. This operation would not have been possible without tremendous teamwork. Approximately 2 years ago, the FBI began a multi-agency investigation into the Aryan Family and other predominantly white prison gangs. They were distributing kilo quantities of narcotics, including fentanyl, throughout western Washington and the Pacific Northwest. To provide a greater impact, the investigative team focused on dismantling this drug trafficking organization by eliminating sources of supply and high-level redistributors who were heavily involved in other criminal activity. Throughout the course of the investigation, we've seized 223 firearms, approximately $719,000 in U.S. currency, 111 kilograms of methamphetamine, 3.8 kilograms of fentanyl powder, almost 1 million fentanyl pills, 4 3/4 kilos of heroin, and almost 3 kilograms of cocaine. The pictures on the posters here display just a fraction of those quantities seized, which underscores the significant quantities involved in this investigation. On the surface, we see the makings of a movie: prison gangs, neo-Nazis, money laundering, confidential informants. But what we don't see, and what I like to emphasize, is the patience of law enforcement involved in this investigation. It takes an incredible amount of effort to analyze the data that connects the dots to the various levels of this drug trafficking organization. As law enforcement, we want to find the sources of supply to stop the flow of dangerous drugs into our community in the Pacific Northwest. Identifying the full scope of the conspiracy can take years, but allows law enforcement to dismantle the entire organization. In this case, many drug trafficking organizations, many drug trafficking organizations are well entrenched and difficult to infiltrate. It's tough to reach the sources of supply because they're well hidden deep within the organization. Our task isn't done, and the investigation will continue, but we're here to recognize the hard work of hundreds of personnel executing arrest and search warrants, processing evidence, and providing technical expertise. Drug trafficking organizations create a cycle of addiction, crime, and destruction. Our mission is to break that cycle by removing the drugs before members of our community become addicted, by arresting traffickers that each form a link within the organization, and by demonstrating crime has consequences. Again, I want to thank our partners for their efforts in this significant investigation and the outcome, and I would like to introduce Jake Galvin, the Special Agent in charge for the DEA.
Good morning. I'd like to thank all our partners at the state, local, and federal levels who participated in this investigation with us also. The amount of narcotics seized during this investigation is shocking. Fake fentanyl pills seized during the investigation were smuggled into the U.S. from Mexico and also manufactured within our community. The organization, comprised of individuals linked to a white supremacist group, cultivated a business relationship with members of the Sinaloa cartel to import and distribute a staggering amount of narcotics. These criminal relationships are ruthless, calculating, and they do not care who they harm. Our combined efforts in this investigation seized enough fentanyl to kill everyone who lives in the city of Tacoma, the city of Seattle, and have enough lethal doses left over to poison an additional 500,000 individuals within the Puget Sound region. The partnerships here today are critical in defeating these organizations and keeping our communities safe and healthy. Thank you.
Good morning, Robert Hammer with Homeland Security Investigations. Once again, here we are, less than a month after having another major fentanyl operation, standing before you to talk about another conspiracy involving guns, cartels, and how it connects all the way into white supremacist organizations here in the state of Washington. I want to highlight the fact that this case was worked as an OCDETF case, Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force case. This is exactly how the team up here approaches all of our major fentanyl cases in this region. We do it collectively as a team, and the results that we see today and collectively across the past several years have demonstrated the results that we do when we partner together as a team. We are stronger together when we join efforts. I want to thank our partners with the FBI, DEA, Tacoma PD, and all the others for the great work and collaboration. It would not have been for those partnerships, this organization would not have been dismantled. I think it's important to note, just to add on to some of the things that have been said today, that not only are we seeing the drugs come in from Mexico, but we're also seeing, in this instance, the sheer amount of weapons that we see. Some of those are going down to Mexico to fuel the violence of the cartels down there in Mexico. And in terms of scope, while we're standing here today at the Tacoma courthouse, it's important to note that the scope of this investigation ranged from Mexico to Arizona, to all of Washington and even up into parts of Alaska. And then finally, I really want to leave folks with the fact that we just got briefed on the drug trends last week here in Washington, and fentanyl prices in Washington are actually lower in Washington than they are in California. And the fentanyl prices are tied to the laws of supply and demand. We typically see prices cheaper at the source of supply, but not in this case. The drugs have to go through California in order to get to Washington, and yet they're still cheaper here than they are in California. We are literally being inundated in this region with fentanyl on a daily basis. And the law enforcement team here is committed every single day, and all of our agents and officers are working tirelessly to fight the plague that is going on in our streets. So we're addressing the supply side. We really need to get together and have a bigger conversation with our community members to address the demand side of the equation as well. The safety of our communities and the lives of our loved ones depend on it.
Good morning. I'll just echo what you've heard this morning. This was a partnership from beginning to end. It is not a one-time partnership. We're going to continue to make Tacoma safe. That is our goal. None of these drugs, none of these guns will make it to the streets of Tacoma. That is a success for us. So I'm extremely proud to say thank you to our state and federal partners. We needed this, and we appreciate our partnership with you. Thank you.
With that, we'll take some questions.
Yes. I just have one question. You say that all of these guns and drugs are coming from Mexico, making their way to Tacoma. That's over 1,200 miles away. Can you talk a little bit about how this kind of firepower, these kinds of drugs are making their way from Mexico all the way up here?
Well, just to be clear, the drugs are principally coming from Mexico. The firearms are going to Mexico mostly. So we're talking about reverse transactions. And we've talked about it before, and these guys have lots of expertise. Drugs work their way through Mexico through multiple sources. People bring them up across the border, people mail them here. Sometimes we see drugs coming through the waterways up into Washington State. The drug cartels are trying everything we can. But to see all these weapons, especially as Hammer said, go down to Mexico, where the cartels are engaged in daily violence and people are dying on a daily basis, and knowing that those weapons are principally coming from the United States of America is a significant problem we have to address.
Mr. Brent.
Clarify where these drugs are being sold. Is it on the streets? Is it in the prison population? Have you been able to trace that at all?
Yeah, so the drugs are going everywhere, quite simply. So principally coming here into Washington, the investigation here also touched Arizona, going up to Alaska in some instances. The people that we indicted were the high-level distributors getting their drugs from the cartel. They work with lower-level distributors, and then we're seeing them all across our communities. I want to note that we've seen overdose deaths skyrocket in the last couple of years, principally fed from fentanyl, but it all starts in one place, and then when it works its way up here, then gets spread out throughout the community.
Yeah, Mr. Brown, you had mentioned that there is a lead defendant. Is that Jesse James Bailey, who's at the top of the list here? What makes him the lead defendant?
He was the principal organizer in this investigation. He was the one that had ties to the cartel, working with others, alleged to have distributed through a network of people. He was the key of the crux of this investigation. It relies on multiple levels of distributors, but he was the chief organizer as alleged in this indictment.
How much of this was being run from inside the prisons?
There were a lot of these individuals were connected through their prison ties, but most of the distribution was happening in the streets. Mr. Bailey himself, as I said, lived in Steilacoom, where I grew up, and was distributing all throughout Pierce County.
Have you been able to tie any of these firearms to any specific crimes, any shootings or anything of that nature here locally?
The investigation is ongoing. With this amount of firepower, it was seized not only during the arrest last week, but during the course investigation. There's a lot of work that we'll have to do to track and see whether these weapons are involved in any particular act of violence or dangerousness.
Sir, can you talk a bit about the Aryan family, how they operate in prison to recruit people, and then, is this drug trafficking, is that sort of ancillary to or is this the way they're making money, or sort of the structure here of what you've been able to figure out?
Yeah, we probably don't have time to detail it in great detail. Prison gangs have been around for a very long time. I do know we have a partner here from the Department of Corrections. Maybe he can address that question more specifically. But we've seen prison gangs operate here in the state and across the country. They form tight relationships, often guided by violence within the prisons, and when they get out of prison, they rely on some of those same networks that they built while they were incarcerated.
Were these guns purchased? Were they stolen? Do you have any insight into that?
It's a kind of a mixture, but I still say there's lots more investigation for us to do. And if you just look, I mean, we have over 200, 230 weapons in this case. The vast majority of them were the types of weapons that you're seeing here: high-powered AR-style weapons, military-grade weapons, incredibly dangerous. But we'll have to continue to work about where these weapons came from.
Have you seen much evidence, or what have you seen in terms of them using the revenues from this endeavor to advance their ideology in some way? Is there a direct connection there that you see?
No, I don't have more information on that.
Can you go into detail, some level of detail about where some of these raids happened? What cities in Washington, what cities in Arizona?
I don't, Rick, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So here in Washington, we executed warrants throughout the Seattle and Tacoma metro area. We also had 2 locations in Arizona, one in Las Vegas as well. So this really covers the entire region, not just Washington, as was detailed in some of the statements, that it was throughout the entire metro area here and then reaching into states along the West Coast.
Is the Arizona location, it's kind of like the receiving from the stuff coming from Mexico?
It's just part of the entire conspiracy. No one location is more or less significant than the others. They were just areas that we had specific information that evidence would be retained and that we knew subjects were there to be arrested.
And I wanted to ask you, go ahead, Mr. Brown, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
We also saw that during the course of the investigation, as law enforcement was doing its work, that some of the individuals that were part of the wiretap decided to relocate to Arizona because they thought it would be safe.
And again, I also wanted to ask Special Agent Colodi, this might be for you, but I believe you said some of the drugs were being sent through the mail.
I'm just saying in general, we seize drugs, fentanyl in particular, from multiple sources. People coming across the border, people who are mailing it. At SeaTac, we see people bringing drugs on a regular basis across into our airport. So as we think about the ways that we need to attack this drug problem, we have to realize that there are multiple sources of entry into the United States.
Well, I'm just curious how you combat that when it's being sent through the U.S. mail. I mean, it's almost impossible to screen it all.
So we
Would
work
you mind
closely-
stepping?
So the investigative team works closely with our partners with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. And so through that partnership, there are avenues where we can fight and interdict some of the threats posed by drugs being sent through the mail.
Now, I don't need specific numbers, but do you have a rough idea of how much the Postal Inspection Service fines versus how much might get through, like a ratio?
You would have to ask the Postal Inspection Service. I couldn't speak to it.
Question for SAC Galvin. You talked a little bit about the connections with the cartel. Can you describe a little bit how that relationship was forged, what that connection looks like, how they operate?
Well, I think I would defer to Zach Colodi because that was formed in the prisons. So I would leave it to that, but it's not uncommon. We do see those relationships come together like that, and then once people transition out, they sort of employ what they learned on the outside.
Before we finish, I just want to say one final thing, and that's the thank you to all the men and women that are behind you all, the people that were working those wiretap investigation for well over a year. My 2 lead prosecutors who were dedicated to this case for a very long time. We get to stand here and talk about their success, and obviously this is an ongoing investigation and just an indictment at this stage, but it's all the agents and law enforcement officers that were working this case, that were doing the seizures during the course of the wiretap investigation, to the AUSAs who are monitoring that wire for well over a year. The kudos and the credit for this work and the ongoing work ahead really goes to them. So thank you all for coming. We appreciate it.
If you have individual one-on-one questions, let me know. I can try to